So today we're going to demonstrate the upper threading of a domestic high arm fiddle bass. Your fiddle bass won't look like this. Yours will be black. This one I repainted, and I will say more about the machine later on. The first thing we're going to do is a quick run through of the threading, and then we'll slow down, take it slower, talk about each individual part. So here we go. Here's the spool pin, thread on the spool pin. This device here is the tensioner, and it's two metal pieces. You drop the thread down through the hole and slide it out. It'll come out in between those two pieces. And then holding onto the back, slide it around so that it's now coming out in between these two. This screw here will allow you to tighten or loosen the tension. Here there is a thread guide, which you can just snap the thread underneath. This is the take-up arm. You can see it goes up and down. You put it at the highest point and put the thread through the take-up arm. Now we're going to pause. It's going to be a little harder to see the white thread against the nose of the machine here, but I think you'll be able to follow along. You take the thread, and we're going to put it behind this half circle of a thread guide here. You'll see that there's a little arm here. You're going to pull the thread so that it loops around that arm, like that, okay? So you've got it behind the thread guide and looped around the front of the arm. Then as the take-up lever goes up and down, that arm pulls out also, creating a little slack in the thread. Okay. Then from there, thread comes down, and we're going to thread it left to right, and I'm going to do that now. Let's take a look now at winding the bobbin. This is the bobbin winder. This is the bobbin. It's a spindle type bobbin. It's got two little pins, and you'll notice that there's a little hole in the top of the spindle. Show you how that works in a minute. This is the bobbin winder turned off or not engaged. The treadle belt is free. It's not interacting with the bobbin winder. To get a bobbin to wind, you're going to slide that up and put the treadle belt behind it. Mine doesn't stay in place. I don't know if this screw right here isn't tight enough. I don't know. So I'm going to be holding this in place while I wind the bobbin. But before we get started, let's look at how the thread is threaded through the machine. We're going to skip the tensioner entirely and thread through this thread guide, and then bring the thread back towards the bobbin winder. We're going to put the thread from below through to the top of the spindle. I hope you can see that. I'm looking to see if you can see it. There we go. I hope you can see that. Okay. Pull that out enough. Then we're going to seat the bobbin in the bobbin winder. You can pull this out. It gives it a little bit more room. You have to pull it out to give it a little bit more room. You get it in there, and the pins seat into little holes. I'm then going to snip this extra thread off so that it doesn't get in the way. Get my bobbin winder in the on position. Now on a Singer and many other machines, there's a dial here, a heart-shaped dial that controls the flow of the thread back and forth across the bobbin winder. We don't have this on this machine, so you're responsible for doing that yourself, which I'll show you. You're going to hold on to the thread and just keep a little light tension on it. Whoops, forgot. Get all this started. There we go. And so as you treadle, you're going to move the thread back and forth. Pick up the speed a little bit. I should mention that it's important that if your clutch knob doesn't work, as it doesn't on this machine, and your needle is still going up and down, just make sure that you've pulled the thread out of the needle so that you're not making a big mess underneath. Alright, you shouldn't overfill the bobbin. We've got a lot longer that we could go there, but I'm not going to fill the whole bobbin. I'm just demonstrating for you here. So when you take it out, you've got that little tab at the top, that little extra thread at the top. Snip that off, and now you have a nice smoothly wound bobbin to use in your sewing. I'm now going to attempt to show you how to load the bobbin into the shuttle. Bobbin shuttle. It's a fiddly procedure, and I'm not really a videographer. I'm just a person with a camera. So what I really recommend that you do is go to the website www.ismacs.net and look for the new domestic shuttle. They have instructions, very clearly detailed illustration with verbal directions accompanying it, and that's how I learned how to do it. And if I learned how to do it, you can learn how to do it too. The bobbin, there are two ways to hold the bobbin or to put the bobbin in. In one, what you need to look at is as the thread crosses the top of the bobbin, see, it's going across the top here, is it going off to the left, or crossing the top, is it going off to the right? You want it to be going off to the right. Now, the shuttle here that the bobbin goes into is a long cylinder, sometimes called bullet shuttles. If you have an old Singer, you may be familiar with this type of machine. Many machines used it back in the late 1800s. This one's a little different from the Singers in that it has a lid or a top to it, and you have to slide that open. And it opens, it just slips to the side. Then you take your bobbin with the thread going off to the right, and you drop it in so that the thread slides down this groove right here. So there's your thread, there's the groove. Just let the thread slide down the groove, and take that thread around to the back of this piece that folds over the top, this piece right here. Now there are all sorts of holes and pokey things, and most of them don't matter. I'm sure they're for something, but I don't know what. What you need to do is to put your thread through back to front, and then make sure it catches underneath this little finger at the bottom, and slide this up and snap it closed. So there's your shuttle. You can see a little bit of the thread right here, and the thread's coming up this way. And then you drop the shuttle into the machine. You have to get the shuttle race in the right position. But other than that, it just drops in here. Okay. And then you hold the top thread and the bobbin thread. Whoops, I'm going backwards. Make a pass. Pull it up. There's your bobbin thread. And now you're ready to stitch. The machine is threaded now, and I'm going to demonstrate its stitching. One tip I have for you is to make sure you have plenty of thread pulled off to the side and have a good grip on it, because as this take-up arm moves, it can pull a surprising amount of thread back up while you're sewing. One more tip is that on this machine, unlike Singer's and many other machines, The hand wheel turns away from you as it sews. I hope you can hear it. Makes a nice sound. And again, when you're pulling it out when you're pulling the work out from the sheen, pull some of this thread down before you pull it through the needle. It breaks easily. I did that the first time I filmed this segment. And again, it takes a lot of thread up when the thread take-up arm goes up and down. So plenty of thread out to the side. And here we have a beautiful stitch, well balanced on both sides. I want to give you a closer look at some of the features of this machine. Spool pin, nothing to explain there. This is the tensioner. And it's my opinion that a better tensioner than this has never been made. I really don't understand why anyone would have given this up. Tension is one of the biggest headaches for people. I teach people to sew, and I talk to a lot of people that only sew a little bit and occasionally, and they're so frustrated with the dial and the numbers. Well, there's no numbers, there's no springs. It's two pieces of metal. I'm going to take it apart and show you. Nothing could be simpler. That's the first piece. It has a section in there that allows you to thread it. And then there's another piece that goes on the top, and it has a hole for the thread to go in to start with. And then you just put the screw through the two holes in it and screw it back down into the machine. It's easier when you're not reaching around a camera to do this. It's really very simple. Now, how do you control the tension? You screw it down tighter. You can see the metal going down, actually. It gets tighter. You unscrew it, it gets looser. Okay? So simple. So again, I showed this in the first section. Here's your thread. It goes down through that hole, through the concave area underneath, or the little gap there, and comes down like that. I'm going to tighten that up a little bit more. It's really loose. And then the thread slides in between these two plates and comes out the front. And with tension, I don't pay any attention to the numbers on the fancy machines that I have. Now, a modern machine maybe, but not vintage. It's just how it feels. I just do it by feel. That feels too tight. Loosen it up a little bit. That feels pretty good. Loosen up just a tiny bit more. To me, that feels just right. And you'll know when you start sewing whether your tension is right or not. So that's the tensioner. Most brilliant tensioner ever made. A lot of the older machines have these, not just the Domestic. And we swing around this way. I try to get my camera really close. There we go. You can see the first thread guide. You can just slip the thread right underneath there. And then you have the take-up lever to the left. And I'll just go and do that again while we're here. So that just slips underneath just like a modern machine with slot threading, and then goes through the hole in the take-up arm. I think I called it a take-up lever. It's a take-up arm. And pulling that on down. Okay. I'll pause that and swing around to the front. Let's take a closer look at the front of the machine. I sometimes call it the nose because I really don't know what it's supposed to be called. We looked earlier at how the thread comes through the take-up arm, and you'll notice there's a groove or divot in the machine right here, which is going to allow the thread to drop down the front of the machine without rubbing against the edge of the machine there and wearing on the thread. One thing I didn't talk about when we were discussing the threading of the machine was the role of the presser foot lifter in the tensioner. And the reason I didn't talk about it is because there is no role for the presser foot lifter in the tensioner on this type of machine. On a more modern machine, by which I mean 1890 to 1900 and later, tensioners had discs that grasp the fabric, and when you lift the presser foot, it opens up those discs. The thread can then drop in between them, and when you put the presser foot down, the discs tighten up and it puts tension on the thread. Well, you saw the tensioner on this machine earlier. It's two pieces of metal and a screw. It's not attached to the presser foot in any way whatsoever. So it makes no difference at all on this type of machine if your presser foot is up or down, although it could get in the way here, so we'll leave it up while we finish threading the machine. We see a half moon shaped thread guide here. The thread goes behind that, and here there's a movable arm, which we'll look at in a minute, and the thread comes forward and loops behind that movable arm I mistakenly said in front of in the earlier video, and then it drops down. There is no other thread guide, so it goes straight down and threads left to right through your needle. And then as the take-up arm goes up and down, you'll see that the movable arm moves forward, creates a little bit of slack in the thread, which is going to make your stitch formation possible, and that's going to happen with every stitch. We can see the back of the pillar here. Again, this is a machine that I repainted and made decals for, and I have information about what the machine is and when I did it here, not trying to fool anyone that this is original. This round knob right here is the stitch length regulator, so you can turn this forwards and backwards and regulate to shorter or longer stitches. I'll tell you a little bit about the history of this machine. First, you can see that my very professional photo studio is just a corner of my living room with a science fair project board and some black velvet draped over it, which worked very well for photographing that white thread against the black background, I must say. I restore vintage and antique sewing machines as a hobby, and a couple years ago I got a notion that I would like to try to paint a machine, like a completely new looking paint job. But I didn't want to harm a machine that might have any kind of value. I didn't want to destroy any existing decals, so I wanted a really, really beat up machine, and this was it. When I found it, it was filthy. The paint was worn away completely from about a fourth of the machine itself. It was just down to the bare metal. The wood was black from old varnish, and it was a mess, and it was $40 for everything, the treadle, the cabinet, and the machine. I repainted the machine. There's information about that if you'd like to try it yourself. It's really pretty easy if you're willing to accept some limitations. I go into all that in the blog. I like hammered Rust-Oleum, which covers a lot of flaws, but it's a little tricky to work with. So if you want to know about that, the blog is dragonpoodle.blogspot.com. Search for Shield Maiden, and you'll find all the information about how this was restored. The machine, the cabinet, the irons, and I made my own water slide decals, and that's covered in there also. I really love this machine. Of all the machines I've had go through my hands, which is a couple hundred, this one is in my top 5 just for the way it sews. It's a beautiful stitcher. I don't really know how to quantify or describe that, but sometimes when you sit down, just everything feels right, and that's always been the case with this machine. But I have over 100 sewing machines in my house because I do like to restore them, and they have to go somewhere after they've been restored. I've kept this one for several years. I've sewed on it. I've done some quilt piecing on it. I really like it, but it's time for it to move on, and it's going to go and live with one of my favorite relatives. So one of my favorite machines going to a favorite relative. That's just good all the way around, and I'm very happy about that. So I hope you have a domestic high arm fiddle base of your own. If you do, I suggest to you that it's probably a treasure and well worth restoring it. This would sew just as well, by the way, if I hadn't painted it. That doesn't matter at all. But I've enjoyed this a lot, and I've enjoyed telling you about it. Thank you.